Getting the job done right is the goal of every home builder and homeowner. As a member of our building community, All Access will become a trusted resource for every stage of your building and renovation projects. Plus, we're constantly adding new project guides, videos, articles, expert tips, and more for members only, because there's always more work to be done. Sign up now or give a gift to another builder at finehomebuilding.com/allaccess.
Softwood lumber like Western red cedar is 50% carbon by weight. And so when you're talking about environmental footprints and environmental messages, wood products, especially Western red cedar, are your best choice because they are renewable. They come from sustainably managed forests.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Mark Petersen. Today I'm joined by Paul Mackie, aka Mr. Cedar. Paul is a cedar specialist with the Western Red Cedar Lumber Association. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Good morning, Paul. How are you doing?
Great. Mark, how are you? Appreciate this opportunity.
Excellent. So let's start about you. Tell us a little bit about the association. It's the Western Red Cedar Lumber Association. Tell us a little bit about that and what your role within that association is, and just a little bit of background on how long you've been in the lumber business.
Sure. The Western Red Cedar Lumber Association, which is known as the voice of the cedar business, has been around since 1954. Was formed originally to promote what's known in Boston as clapboard siding in New England. So it's been around since 1954. I've been with the association since 1995. Family's kind of new to the cedar business. My great-grandfather moved from Kansas to Seattle in 1900 and purchased an interest in two Western red cedar shingle mills, Salmon Bay Mill and Green Lake Mill. And my grandfather returned from World War I, ran a Southern Pine Mill for a year, moved back to Seattle, and started one of the first people to develop a market for Western red cedar in Japan. And I actually have his grade rules that he wrote for that market, starting in 1923.
Wow. So did you grow up in did you grow up around sawmills, working in them, smelling the sawdust, getting your hands dirty?
Not quite. But I did work one summer on a logging crew outside of West Yellowstone, Montana. I did work in a veneer mill. I did work in a plywood mill. All of those encouraged me to not want to do those things.
Right. The logging things, I got a lot of respect for those guys. I mean, I'm sure it's better conditions now than it was 100 years ago, but I don't think you can take the hard work out of that job.
Well, of course, there's the old joke of this, which is, what's this? And it's a shingle weaver ordering 5 beers. Because making shingles is, I've seen film from the 20s and the 30s back in my granddad's day, and it's just, how fast they go is phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Let's talk about so the association, does it just represent red cedar, I'm assuming, and how many members do you have? How does it work?
Great question, and very important. We are a membership organization. Our primary members are primary and secondary manufacturers of Western red cedar. Our mills make everything except individual shakes and shingles. And we also have a network of specialty distributors that specialize in Western red cedar. They stock it and service the retail lumber yards throughout North America. And then we do have others that support us. We have a network of, not a big network, but a network of some premium retailers in certain key markets that are really, really good at cedar. And then we have other supporting companies that have interest in the use of Western red cedar, like nail companies, paint and stain companies.
Oh, sure. Gotcha. So let's talk about the tree itself. Western red cedar. Give us, is it tall? Is it wide? What are the characteristics of it actually while it's still in the ground? Where does it grow?
Okay. Well, the growth range of Western red cedar is wide. It grows on the West Coast. as far south as Fort Bragg, California, all the way up to Ketchikan, Alaska on the Pacific Northwest coast. Primary growth range is in Western Washington, coast of British Columbia, Vancouver Island, and the coast of British Columbia. There is some growth in the panhandle of Idaho, Western Montana, Eastern Washington. Some of the manufacturers identify those products that come out of there as inland red cedar as opposed to Western red, same species of wood. But it's an incidental species in the forest. It's not like there's a cedar forest out there that we can go manage and harvest. It's on the coast of Vancouver Island, as an example. The species mix is Pacific Coast hemlock, Douglas fir, and Western red cedar. Western red cedar is only 20% of the stand, but it's the most valuable tree in the forest.
So what's the difference between Western red cedar and Eastern red cedar? There is an Eastern red cedar, right?
Eastern white cedar.
Okay.
Eastern white cedar, and actually Western red cedar and Eastern white cedar are botanically related. They're both part of the giant arbor vitae family. Western red cedar is Thuja plicata. Eastern white cedar is Thuja occidentalis.
Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah, and they're used for similar things. Eastern white cedar production is very, very heavy to white cedar shingles. The difference between the species is really the color. Really, the Eastern white cedar is creamy yellow in color. Western red has a huge range of color, the wide range of color naturally occurring. That's one of its beauties.
Okay, so cedar, every single day there's a new fancy man-made product, whether it's composites or whatever. Why would somebody today choose cedar over one of these long-lasting, somewhat proven other products?
Well, I would underline somewhat proven, I guess. It seems like there's a new composite coming on the line every week. A lot of them are petroleum-based products. And almost all of them, when they identify their products, they use the word cedar. They compare it with cedar. Cedar is the standard to be achieved. So why would you use it? Well, why would you not use the real thing when it's available? And then, of course, there are other messages that go along with using wood products. They're renewable, recyclable, biodegradable. They're sustainable. Cedar comes from sustainably managed forests. The forests are certified by SFI, primarily SFI and CSA. So we're talking about a renewable resource that's going to be available forever, versus these composites, which have much heavier environmental footprints than do wood products, especially Western red cedar.
Yeah, well, those are all good reasons to consider cedar. Is it available everywhere in the North America? Can you go to a lumber yard or an orange or blue store and find it everywhere?
Almost everywhere. And I codify that by saying that there are markets where it's more prevalent than in others. The highest value market for Western red cedar is New Jersey, New York, and New England, which is where a large volume of the clear material goes. One of the largest volume markets for Western red cedar is Texas and Oklahoma, because of the outdoor structures that they build, the pergolas and the pavilions. Smallest post they're going to use in a pergola or a pavilion in Texas is an 8x8. And a huge volume goes into that market, and it's available. It's available really, really everywhere. There are areas where it's more concentrated, certainly.
From a natural wood standpoint, what would cedar's biggest competitor be? I'm assuming a redwood, or is it the exotic South American woods?
I would say yes. That when people are talking about naturally durable wood species, the two names that are mentioned almost simultaneously are cedar and redwood, and there is a certain amount of that's produced every year, and that's what's available. And it's not like the one thing that frustrates people, and of course during this last COVID scenario where supplies got really tight because everybody was sheltered at home, and all of those fences and decks that have been on the to-do list and on the honey-do list on the refrigerator for years, all of a sudden they all got built, and it really that combined with some previous labor problems supplies were tight and got tighter because a whole bunch of stuff flowed out. And there were production shutdowns throughout the industry for 6-8 weeks, but with the increased demand of the DIY.
Yeah, and that was anyone in the business knows that the supply chain has been just a disaster for the last year. The demand and the availability of products. So what about cedar? So if you took why does cedar make such a good outdoor product? So let's say you just take a cedar. Well, let's say take a cedar 2x4 and you take a pine 2x4 and you lay them outside or you make a railing out of them. Why is cedar? What qualities does it have that make it better than just a regular standard 2x4?
Great question, Mark. Great question, Mark. Yeah, cedar is naturally rot, decay, and insect resistant. It has ingrown preservatives in its heartwood that make it last a long time outside. The preservatives are called tannins or extractives. And when I do training for distributors, I've got a slide that shows you what those things are. One of them is metal thujate. I don't remember the other 5, but they are ingrown in the wood species. When you take a non-durable wood species, and you mentioned pine, and you to get it to have equivalent performance in an exterior application, you have to pressure treat it with chemicals because it doesn't have the natural preservatives. That combined with its stability, because it's one of the 2 most stable softwood species available in North America. The other one's California redwood. You get great performance from these wood species in exterior applications. And then, of course, it's naturally beautiful. Why do all those composites, say have attached the name cedar to some of their products? It's because it's the gold standard. So back to the scenario of a yellow pine 2x4 railing versus a cedar railing, is it the sun or moisture that does the most harm to, so is it better at resisting sun or is it better at resisting moisture or both? Both. Again, sunlight causes photodegradation, which is the sunburning of the surface cells of the wood. So all wood outside is either going to turn brown or gray from exposure to sunlight. Moisture is what causes decay. So you add moisture and oxygen, and that's what causes decay. So cedar resists sunlight. It turns a beautiful gray patina, especially in coastal applications. Again, one of the reasons it's so popular in New England is that it turns a beautiful gray color when exposed to sunlight and especially salt water. But again, the natural decay resistance is what is one of its superior performance qualities.
What are people using it for? Are they using it for so if you took the 100% of the cedar that's made, what's the largest percentage? Is it going to siding? Is it going to shingles? Is it going to decks? Where's most of it being used?
It's really a 3-pronged answer, and I can't speak about the volume of shingles, except for the fact that there is production of eastern white cedar in shingles. There is production of western red cedar in shingles and shakes. But when it comes to western red, the 4 primary the 4 primary uses are for siding and trim and decking and outdoor structures. With additional uses for interior paneling and for soffit and that sort of thing, but primarily outside because of its durability and stability.
This podcast is basically to help our audience, finish their project, have a better project, end result. Finish it without making mistakes. When somebody, and just pick one, whether it's siding or roofing, or maybe the same tip applies to all of them, what kind of tips or advice when people, not finishing, we'll talk about that a little later, but just as far as strictly installing cedar, whether it be a deck or whether it be a pergola or whether it be siding, what kind of advice can you give to help people make mistakes when they're working on projects that have cedar?
Okay, well, and again, the advice is going to be driven really by the application because the advice it differs a little bit when it comes to decking versus siding and trim. certainly using the right kind of fastener is really, really key, because I think that's kind of where you were going with the question. And you need high quality corrosion resistant fasteners, and in all markets, the best one to use is stainless steel. And if you're
okay.
yeah, and if the project's on salt water or near it, then it should be marine grade. That's a big mistake that's oftentimes made in siding and trim and decking, is that they use a cheap fastener, which ultimately will discolor the wood at the head of the fastener, because anything other than stainless steel has a coating on it. Most of them are zinc coated.
So actually siding, I just thought of, there's certain products out there, whether it's fiber cement or composites, there's certain sidings where you do have butt joints, and some of them you leave a gap and some you don't. And with cedar, it seems like it would expand and contract quite a bit. Do you need to leave a gap when you're siding, lap siding at a butt joint?
No, you butt it tight.
Really?
Yeah.
Not at all.
Not at all. You first off, you need to pre-finish siding on all 6 sides, and when you have a butt joint, there's been a cut, whether it's a 90-degree angle or an overlapping scarf cut, and you really need to either prime or stain that at the ends of those pieces.
Sure.
And that needs to meet on solid wood, by the way, and that's because the end grain of cedar is the most porous part of the wood, which means it absorbs the most moisture. So especially in markets like New England, where clapboard, as I mentioned before, is the cedar siding products that's used, and the highest grades are used there. It's a primer and paint market, and so when you're dealing with a primer and paint finish, and I know I'm getting ahead of you a little bit on the questions, that's a film former. And if you don't touch up those ends to provide the water repellency, then it's going to absorb moisture, and at that butt joint, it's going to push the coating system off.
But you do recommend putting some type of finish on the backside of them.
Absolutely, we recommend that it be pre-primed or pre-stained on all 6 sides before it goes on the wall. When it comes,
would it matter? So let's say, well, I guess you wouldn't do this. Could you use? Well, I was thinking, do you need to? Because some stains are really expensive. So could you use like a less expensive finish on the backside and then your fancy stain on the front side after it's installed? Would that matter, or is it just a better idea to finish the thing all the way around?
It's better to finish it all the way around with the same product. Trying to switch products, from the back to the front, you're going to slop it over one way or the other. Sure. And probably not be. And again, we're big proponents of factory application. In many, many markets, factory applied finishes are available.
Yeah, and the last couple jobs, and you really can't beat a factory finish just because the moisture is it's so controlled, and it's it's an indoor environment and it's so consistent, and So the last couple jobs I did were pre-finished, and I was surprised how long they lasted. They lasted for, one of them I did at least 15 years ago. It still looks fantastic.
In some cases, with factory applied finishes, primer and solid stain or primer and paint, there are warranties available. 2-coat system, 15-year warranty. 3-coat system, which means 1 primer, 2 top coats, 25-year warranty on a factory applied film forming finish. So your experience, really it reflects what you get with factory applied finishes and the warranties that are available in some places.
So probably the number one question that everybody's sitting here, if they're listening, wondering what they want the answer to this at this job and my previous job, one of the most popular questions we get is, what is the best finish to, what if I'm putting a cedar deck on, what's the best product out there that's going to make my deck look better for longer and last longer? So I'm guessing you don't recommend one over the other, but maybe you do. I'll let you answer that. Is there a type, or is there a brand? What would you tell these folks?
Okay, 3-pronged answer, maybe 2. Again, with decking, because it's exposed to a lot more moisture, and in some markets, obviously snowfall, freeze thaw, and it's exposed to a lot more sunlight from direct sunlight from above. The lowest maintenance option, because maintenance is an issue that comes up, especially with decking. Lowest maintenance option is to apply nothing and let it turn gray.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
But by putting an extra protective UV coating on it won't necessarily make it last longer.
Well, this is complicated by the formulas and finishes that are available in different markets,
Yeah.
and restrictions on VOC emissions continue to be tightened, and that's volatile organic compounds, and you get VOC emissions with solvent-borne oil-based products, which means you're not talking soap and water cleanup, you're talking mineral spirits or turpentine. Those products are well absorbed by the wood. They are, but they're not available in all marketplaces. And if you leave that type of product line and move towards those that have much lower VOCs, then you're much more likely to have them form a film. And if you put a film former on a flat surface, it's going to flake. So that's why the number one, the best option for low maintenance is to apply nothing and let it weather naturally. Now you can apply solvent-borne oil-based transparent stains with the understanding that that's going to provide water repellency, which will retard the flat surface's ability to grow mold and mildew. And with the assumption that it's still going to turn gray. The biggest battle
Right.
you've got, you're fighting UV on a flat surface. And I mean, there are
I guess that was not the answer I was looking for. I thought for sure. I mean, I'm surprised. I would imagine a lot of people are surprised to hear that it's that's a viable option, is to put up a cedar deck and just do nothing with it.
Well,
and I would also imagine that you need to keep it clean. That's part of the deal. You can't let a bunch of organic material sit on it. Piles of leaves sit on it for 4 months at a time.
No, absolutely. You've got to keep it clean, free of debris, and that will reduce its ability to grow mold and mildew. Part of this messaging is because we're faced with the composite products that all claim to be, originally they were no maintenance, and now they're low maintenance.
Sure.
But when you have some of these products, especially the ones that have the wood embossed surface, they actually grow more mold and mildew than a cedar deck does. But that's part of it is that they have put into the consumer's mind the idea that a deck is low maintenance, and a cedar deck can be just as low maintenance as composites, if you're willing to accept the fact that it's going to weather.
And so if you do want to finish, if the gray thing is not your deal and you wanted to maintain, more of a kind of a orangey cedar looking, newer board look, we had a conversation many years ago, and I remember you telling me something that it kind of went against the grain of what I had heard, on my previous projects, that if you're going to put up a cedar fence, let's say, it's better because a lot of people say, well, you got to let it sit for 6 months before you put a stain on it. But it seems to me when I talked to you, you said that was pretty much the exact opposite of what you should do.
If you're going to stain a fence or a deck, then you should do it as soon as the wood is dry enough to accept it.
Which is what, 10, 11%, 9%?
Less than 20.
Oh, okay.
Less than 20%. And with fencing, almost all the fencing that's produced today is unseasoned. It's not kiln-dried. So you do have to allow a fence to dry out before it will either a stain will stick or a stain will be absorbed.
Oh, okay. So there is truth to that. But so are you saying decking has been kiln-dried? So it's not all cedar. It's a matter of whether it's been kiln-dried or not.
That is absolutely, you hit the nail on the head. It used to be that a tremendous volume of the cedar decking that was produced was unseasoned or green, and a much larger percentage of that today is now a kiln-dried product, which means you can stain it right away. You can pre-stain it if you wish, because it's dry.
And you said, and if it is kiln-dried, I think you mentioned that the UV rays will actually make the stain. If you do wait too long and have it in the sun, the UV rays will prevent a good adhesion to the product. Did I get that right?
Pretty close. The UV rays sunburn the surface cells. So it's just like we had 100. I'm in the Seattle area. We had 105 here this year, unheard of. And if you're out in the sun in 105-degree temperature and you get a sunburn on your forearm, the skin's going to blister.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what's going on microscopically with UV and the surface of wood, is that it's sunburning the surface cells, which means they become loosened like the skin on your arm did when it was sunburned. The good news is that because we're living sentient beings, the skin regrows. But
Right.
with the wood is no longer living, so the surface cells are loosened. And that's why after years of exposure to sunlight, wood without protection against UV, wood takes on the appearance of corduroy because
Sure.
the again, we've got growth rings in wood, and growth rings consist of early wood and late wood, and the late wood part of the growth ring is much denser, very narrow with cedar, but much denser, and so it doesn't photodegrade as rapidly as the early wood does. So the early wood degrades more rapidly, and so that's why it takes on a ridged appearance after exposure to sunlight for 10 or 12 or 14 years. So that's why the stain, pigment in the stain doesn't stick.
So how would somebody know if they're getting kiln-dried cedar or not? Is it just a matter of all fencing is not and all decking is, or what? How does that rule? Or is some fencing kiln-dried and some decking not?
Traditional fence boards from fence mills are not kiln-dried. Now, there are those that will use material from random mills that make random length lumber, so they make boards that are 6 or 8 to 20 feet in length, and some of those maybe produce kiln-dried, and if that's the product being used, then you can stain that right away. But a traditional fence mill, and most of them are in Western Washington, they're producing a product that is unseasoned. Not all decking is kiln-dried, but a large percentage of it today is.
So will that information be on the little label that's stuck on the end of the board?
It should be. Well, I'm not sure what it's going to be on the tag on the end of the board, but certainly when someone is specifying the material, they should specify kiln-dried decking if that's what they're looking for.
Okay, but the average person who goes to a home center and picks up, or a lumber yard and picks up some fencing, how would they know which is which?
I guess if it's true fence boards, the assumption is that it's unseasoned or green.
Okay.
Okay.
What about cleaning? So I've always heard that you're not supposed to. So you take a pressure washer, you get the mold and mildew off, and you're not supposed to use too much pressure because that damages the wood. Is that true, or is that just a fairy tale?
No, it's true. It's true. You don't ever want to use more than 800 psi. That came from a contact of mine from a stain company years ago. So you want to use mild pressure, and pressure washing doesn't kill mold and mildew. To kill mold and mildew, you should use a mild bleach solution. And
like a 10% bleach solution?
No, mild. I'll give you the mixture here in a second. We prefer oxygen bleach over chlorine bleach because it's less harmful to surrounding plants in the yard.
Sure.
And again, the mixture, you want to use the mildest solution possible. So for a chlorine bleach mixture, maximum 1 part chlorine, 3 parts water, 1 part chlorine, 4 parts water would be better. And you should add a little non-phosphate liquid detergent to that to aid in the cleaning. And it needs to stay on a deck for 30 minutes. Oftentimes,
okay.
Oftentimes you need to use a scrub brush, not iron, a bristle brush to work it in. And again, we prefer the OxyClean type crystals over the chlorine for killing mold and mildew.
So say that ratio again one more time.
Maximum 1 part chlorine, 3 parts water. 1 part chlorine, 4 parts water is better.
Okay, that's actually more than I thought it would, because I was thinking 1 to 10, but that's more than I thought it would be.
Well, one of the biggest mistakes that I run into is that people put it on and then they don't leave it on long enough.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I probably would have, I probably have done that in the past as well. What about refinishing tips? Is it so you have and I suppose it's going to be product dependent, but you have a deck, it looked great for 10 years, it needs to be refinished. What's the best advice you can give on something like that?
Well, it depends on the condition of the deck. And certainly because it's wood and it's cedar, you do have the option of sanding it down to fresh. And that's
probably your best option, is to actually sand it.
That's certainly, it depends on the degradation. It really does. I mean, if it's a deck that's been down for 10 years and they haven't done anything to it at all, probably sanding is certainly a viable option. And it's a great option. There are other commercial cleaner restorative products that are available depending on the condition of the surface of the deck. So there are products that contain they're restorative products, and they contain oxalic acid, which is an ingredient that deals with iron stains or set in tannin stains or that sort of thing. There are restorative products specifically designed to restore the surface of the deck and get it ready for refinishing.
Does your association put out any publications, or does it have information on your website where you can get some of this information?
Yes, we have multiple publications. We have how to specify, how to install, how to finish, designer handbook, standard patterns, how to install over foam or foam sheathing, all at Real
Really?
Cedar.
Wow.
All at Real Cedar.
Okay.
We also publish a cedar book every year. We skip 2020, but we do it every year, and it's a coffee table ready picture book, if you will, that features homes with unusual uses for Western red cedar, and we're in the process of working on Cedar Book 14 right now.
Well, I was just working on a story not too long ago, and it had to do with installing wood, and it was shipped. It was like a tongue and groove product, I think, and I tried to find. It was very difficult to find information on like how the proper ways to install, natural wood. It's pretty easy when man-made products they have pretty dialed in as far as their instruction manuals. But I've done a couple wood projects where it was almost impossible to find best practices. So you say publications? Is it a website? Can you give us the website, or is there some other place?
Realcedar.com.
Realcedar.com.
Yep.
So all of those things that you mentioned are available there.
Yes.
Okay.
And
cool.
more.
Right. Actually, I was surprised. I wasn't sure. I didn't think you would have that much information. That's great.
Yeah, and most people download it. They go in and they find the publications and they download it and they print it. But all of the technical publications are there free of charge. And we also provide architect advisory services free of charge. We do training for architects, for retailers, for distributors.
Okay, that's great. That's all very helpful. So one thing industry-wide, I've always wondered about this. We know everybody, or most people know, I think, that old growth, you cut a tree down that's been around for 200 years, it's going to have some pretty amazing qualities as far as longevity and as far as durability. And what is the average, how long does a cedar in the ground before we harvest?
Well, we're still working in some areas in first cut areas. You have to harvest a first cut area before you can plant the second growth. And so there's still some of that going on. Now there is more and more second growth coming online.
What do you mean by second growth? I guess
second growth is the trees that you plant in an area after you've harvested it.
So you harvest the trees and when you mentioned at the beginning, I was a little confused. You said, so I'm used to seeing northern Wisconsin, from northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. And when you see these logging setups, it's rows and rows and rows and rows of the same exact tree, yellow pine probably.
Wisconsin is probably oak. It's probably oak, but yeah.
Yeah, no, these are definitely pines. But so that's not how the Western cedar is planted?
No, and it has to do with geography. The southern pine forests, they grow and harvest and replant. It's a monolithic species, and they plant it in rows because the South is relatively flat and rolling hills.
Okay.
We're dealing with more severe geographical challenges here, plus the fact that we have forests that have multiple species in them. I mentioned
why is that? Why not just, if you clear out a forest? Why not, if Western cedar is so valuable? Why not just plant all red Western cedar or Western red cedar again?
Because forest management laws and restrictions don't allow that.
Oh, okay.
No,
Is there do the trees thrive in an environment that has a mixture of different species in it?
Great question, and yes, they actually that's the case. Western red cedar thrives in the shade of the taller on the coast, the taller Douglas fir and hemlock. So when they harvest an area, and about the biggest harvest area you're going to see today is about 40 hectares, which is about 100 acres. About the largest harvest, the 10,000 acre clear cut is long gone, and so they still, when they harvest the area, they leave open spaces so that the fir and the hemlock will thrive, and they when they plant they replant the same mix, and so you still have the biodiverse forest with all of the species. They do leave material on the forest floor to feed, so they leave the limbs and that sort of thing, as opposed to burning them.
Sure.
They leave them there to decay and to feed the growth, but they plant a mixed species. In the panhandle of Idaho, they're dealing with about 6 tree species in their forest, and in that area where we do get some Western red cedar or inland red cedar, it's only about 5% of the stand in western Montana, panhandle of Idaho, and eastern Washington.
Okay, so that's a little different than, I guess, I just assumed that there was big 100-acre tracts of Western red cedar, and every 30 years you come in and cut them all down and plant new ones. And where I was going with that, which apparently doesn't apply, I was just wondering why somebody, well, I kind of understand, why somebody wouldn't just let them sit for another 50 years, take that investment, and once you hit that, you can just keep going at that point, because you would always be, you'd always have this premium wood. But it sounds like it's run a little bit different than that. But then it also begs the question, let's say I'm doing a project, really high-end project, and I do want something that's a little more old growth. How would I find out? I mean, where would I get something like that? How would I even find out where that's available?
Well, and this is sort of one of my smart A answers, is that even if you have a 500-year-old tree,
mm-hmm.
How old is the top 20 feet?
Yeah, I suppose.
It's 20 years,
mm-hmm.
because trees grow up.
That is a smart-ass answer, by the way.
I know. Trees do grow up every year, and they grow in diameter every year with the addition of an additional growth ring. The one misnomer, and I wanted to add this in, is that you mentioned 30 and 50 years. When we're talking about rotation for British Columbia, which is where most of the cedar is coming from, mm-hmm. we're talking up to a 200-year rotation today.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah. I had no idea. I thought there were. So what is it? I mean, what is, so those northern Minnesota yellow pine farms I saw, how long are those things in the ground, do you think?
Well, probably longer than they are in Alabama because of weather conditions. And that certainly that drives. So in Northern California, where the redwood trees come from, they're on a more rapid rotation than when you go, 800 to 1,000 miles north, where the cedar trees are growing, because
they're not growing in January, right?
Well, and again, evergreen trees only grow about 4 to 6 months out of the year.
Even the southern ones?
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I can't speak to that. I would think that, having seen southern pine, that it probably has a longer growing cycle. Whether it grows dormant in the winter or not, I don't know. But I do know that in the Pacific Northwest, that we have growth seasons and non-growth seasons. And with softwood lumber, it grows from somewhere between the 1st of March and the 1st of April to growth stops in October.
Okay.
And it's dormant. Sense. It's dormant, and then it starts to regrow when it starts to warm up again and the snow melts.
That makes sense. We're coming to the end here. Is there anything else is there anything else you want to add?
Well, one thing that we didn't touch on is the real value of the carbon storage of evergreen trees. And that's certainly part of our messaging today. And the wood business messaging is one of the reasons that trees are good is because they absorb CO2 and they emit carbon. And softwood lumber, like Western red cedar, is 50% carbon by weight. And so when you're talking about environmental footprints and environmental messages, wood products, especially Western red cedar, are your best choice because they are renewable. They come from sustainably managed forests versus these other things that are extruded out of machines and they're using non-renewable resources.
Sure, and that actually is a good point, because when I think of, when people say, oh, wood versus whatever, concrete or laminate or composites, it seems like oftentimes they do take that part of the equation out. They say, oh, it costs this much to take them out of the woods, and this much to process them, and this much to ship them. But you're right; they often seem to leave out the equation of how much carbon they've processed before they ever reached a mill.
Yes, and again, one thing just for your listeners or viewers, having the right specification is key to success. So when you're specifying Western red cedar, you need to know the grades, especially with siding, whether it's clear heart VG or A grade in the clear, or select knotty in the tight knot arena. It's very, very important to have the correct specification. And again, you and I talked about availability, and you'll see different grades dominate different markets depending on demand.
And well, there's another good example that I didn't think of. So when you go to your local lumberyard, that grade cedar, let's say it's a lapped siding, that grade cedar in that lumberyard might not be the same as the lumberyard in the next town over or in the next state over. Is that
it? More like it would be if you're in Minnesota or you're in Kansas. Those areas are dominated with knotty material. Whereas you go to Connecticut, New England, Massachusetts, what's stored at those lumber yards primarily is clear.
Oh, okay.
So it's regional. It's more regional, if you will.
But so are we talking aesthetics, or are there performance differences as well between?
It's tradition, really. It's what's in demand, and that does relate to aesthetics. Certainly. Minnesota and Wisconsin, paneling is huge in these markets, and that's almost always knotty, and it's very heavy to pine. There's no doubt about that. But the upper Midwest has always kind of been a knotty market. But we've got a distributor in Illinois or Indiana. He carries one of the finest assortments of clear that you've ever seen. So. Knowing what you want and having the correct grade specification is very, very important. And just because it isn't in stock at your lumberyard doesn't mean they can't get it.
Sure. That's good advice. Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for today. I want to thank you, Paul, for joining us. That was I think it was great information. And thanks to you all for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please comment or review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks to find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody, and thanks again for listening.